All right, let's dive in. You guys really wanted us to unpack the Michael Peterson case, and honestly, who can blame you? It's got all the ingredients for a true crime obsession, right? I mean, it even became this whole documentary series, The Staircase. But today, we're going beyond just the headlines and the TV drama. We're digging into the actual evidence, like legal documents, expert reports, news coverage. We even looked at Peterson's own memoir for this.
Yeah, I mean, this case has it all. It makes you question everything like, was this a tragic accident or a cold-blooded murder or something even weirder? And as we go deeper, you'll see how those lines can get really blurry. It's definitely more than just a simple whodunit.
You got that right. So, what we're going to do today is lay it all out for you fact by fiction so you can decide what really went down that December night in 2001. Okay, so picture this. Durham, North Carolina. We've got Michael Peterson, a successful novelist, Vietnam War vet, local newspaper columnist, the whole 9 yards. He's got this blended family, 5 kids in total, and he's living with his wife, Kathleen.
And on the surface, it looked like they had this picture-perfect life, which is what makes what happened on December 9th even crazier. Peterson calls 911, totally frantic, saying he found Kathleen unconscious at the bottom of the stairs in their house.
Yeah, so at first you think, oh my God, what a horrible accident. But when the investigators started looking closer, things weren't adding up.
Exactly. I mean, for one thing, Kathleen's injuries were brutal. She had all these lacerations on her head, a fractured thyroid cartilage. Like, that's pretty intense for just to fall down some stairs.
And then there are all these inconsistencies in Peterson's story about what happened that night. Like, his account kept changing.
Right, and all of that together just fueled all this suspicion, and then the medical examiner's report comes out.
Yeah?
And it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. Homicide, they ruled it. Multiple blows to the head with a blunt object.
Oh, wow. So now it's not just an accident anymore. So what did the prosecution say happened? What was their theory?
So they zero in on this missing fireplace tool, a blow poke, they called it, which they thought could have been the murder weapon. And even though the defense actually found the blowpoke later, the prosecution was like, nope, we're still going with murder. And they really started focusing on Peterson's character.
So they're trying to paint him as a bad guy, basically.
Exactly. They were bringing up all these things, like how he maybe exaggerated his military service, that he was hiding his bisexuality, and that the marriage wasn't as happy as everyone thought. Oh, and they also kept mentioning this $1.5 million life insurance policy on Kathleen.
Okay, yeah, that life insurance thing is always a red flag, right? I mean, if someone stands to gain financially from a death, it definitely makes you wonder. But just because someone has a life insurance policy, does that automatically make them a murderer?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Having a life insurance policy on its own doesn't prove guilt. And the defense fought back hard against this whole portrayal of Peterson. They brought in people close to the family who were adamant that the marriage was solid and that Kathleen knew about Peterson's bisexuality and was okay with it.
So were they saying it was all just a big misunderstanding? Like, maybe Kathleen did fall down the stairs and they're making something out of nothing.
Well, the defense brought in this big-time forensic expert, Henry Lee. He's kind of a legend in the field. And he actually did this whole demonstration with ketchup, of all things, to show how blood spatter patterns could back up the accidental fall theory.
Okay, ketchup. That's a new one. I gotta admit, I'd be a little skeptical if I saw someone splashing ketchup around a crime scene, but I guess Lee's testimony was pretty convincing for the defense.
It definitely was. But just when you thought this whole case was going to be a fall versus homicide showdown, things took a turn. A really creepy turn. It turns out that back in 1985, a friend of Peterson's, Elizabeth Ratliff, was found dead, and get this, at the bottom of a staircase.
Wait, hold on. Are you serious? 2 deaths, both involving staircases. That's more than a little freaky. So what happened with Elizabeth Ratliff's case? Did they investigate it back then?
So back then, they thought her death was an accident, attributed it to a blood disorder. But because of everything going on with Peterson, they decided to look into it again during his trial. They exhumed her body, did a second autopsy, and you want to know what they found?
What?
Yeah.
Tell me, I'm on the edge of my seat.
The ruling was changed to homicide.
No way. So now we have 2 suspicious deaths, both involving staircases, and Michael Peterson is connected to both of them. Did they ever actually charge him with Elizabeth's death?
Nope, they never filed any charges against him in Ratliff's case. But you can imagine the similarities between the 2 deaths cast this huge shadow over Peterson's trial. Even though there were some conflicting accounts about how much blood was actually found at the scene of Ratliff's death back in '85, this whole thing just added another layer of mystery to everything.
Okay, so we've got the prosecution building their case, painting Peterson as this potential repeat offender. The defense is sticking to the accidental fall, backed up by their expert witness. It's like this classic legal battle, right? But then enter the owl.
Ah, yes, the owl theory. So this is where things get really interesting. A neighbor of Peterson's, T. Lawrence Pollard, had been following the case super closely, and he comes up with this whole theory that maybe Kathleen didn't fall down the stairs but was attacked by an owl outside.
An owl. Seriously, I mean, come on. How could an owl inflict that kind of damage?
Well, Pollard argued that owls are actually super powerful predators. And he had some evidence to back it up. Like, remember that feather they found in Kathleen's hair? He said that was proof. Plus, he argued that the type and location of her injuries were more consistent with an owl attack than with someone hitting her with, like, a fireplace tool or something.
Oh, right, the feather. But did the prosecution and their experts even consider that owl theory as a possibility?
They did, but in the end, they dismissed it. They stuck to their story, saying the injuries were definitely caused by a person. But the owl theory, even though it sounds crazy, it really caught people's attention and made them wonder if maybe all the possibilities hadn't been explored.
Yeah, I gotta wonder if they were just so focused on Peterson as the killer that they overlooked other possibilities.
Right. And that's what makes this case so intriguing. You've got these two totally different narratives, both with their own sets of evidence and experts backing them up. And as we head into the trial phase, it becomes this whole courtroom battle, with each side trying to convince the jury of their version of the truth. Plus, you have the owl theory out there in the public's imagination, even though it wasn't part of the official defense. This case is anything but simple, and it just keeps getting more complicated from here.
Oh man, I am hooked. This is already so much more than I expected. You're right, it's more than just figuring out who did it. There are all these layers of doubt and intrigue, and that owl theory just adds this whole other dimension to the case. I can't wait to see how this all plays out in court. This is wild. Okay, so we're back, and things are about to get really intense. Last time, we were talking about the two main narratives in the Michael Peterson case, accidental fall, or was it murder? And then we had that whole other theory about an owl attack. So now we're at the trial, and it's like everything is on the line.
You know, it wasn't just any trial. They actually allowed cameras in the courtroom, which was pretty unusual back then. This was 2003, way before all these true crime documentaries were everywhere. So the Peterson case became this huge media spectacle. People were totally glued to their TVs, watching this real-life courtroom drama unfold.
Yeah, I can only imagine the pressure that Michael Peterson must have felt. I mean, he's this well-known novelist, a war hero, and now he's being accused of murdering his wife, and the whole world is watching.
Absolutely. And the prosecution, they were not letting up. They kept hammering on those head injuries Kathleen had, the blood spatter, and of course, they brought up Elizabeth Ratliff's death again and again. They were really trying to convince the jury that this was a pattern of violence, that Peterson had a history of hurting women.
So how did the defense fight back against that?
Well, they stuck to their story. Kathleen's death was a tragic accident. They brought in people who knew the Petersons, folks who said they were happy together. They challenged the prosecution's whole portrayal of Peterson as this deceitful, violent guy. And remember Henry Lee, the forensic expert with the kept-up demonstration? They brought him back to emphasize his opinion that the blood spatter could have been caused by a fall.
Right, right. But what about the owl theory? Did the defense use that at all during the trial? It seemed like such a big deal in the media.
That's actually a really important point. The defense never officially used the owl theory as part of their strategy, which is something that Pollard, the neighbor who came up with it, is still pretty upset about. He thinks that if the jury had heard about the owl theory and that feather evidence, it could have changed everything.
Wow, yeah. You have to wonder why the defense didn't go there. Was it a strategy thing? Or did they just not believe the owl theory themselves? It makes you think about all the what-ifs, you know?
Yeah. It's hard to say for sure what went on behind the scenes. But what we do know is that after months of listening to testimony, and with all that media attention, the jury came back with a verdict guilty of first-degree murder. And just like that, Michael Peterson was sentenced to life in prison, no chance of parole.
Man, a life sentence. Knowing everything we've talked about, all the different sides to the story, all the unanswered questions, that's got to be devastating. Not just for Peterson, but for anyone who believes he was innocent.
It was a huge turning point in the case, no doubt. But even with a conviction, the story didn't end there. Peterson's lawyers started appealing like crazy, and then in 2011, something wild happened that totally changed the game.
Oh, I love these twists. What happened? Spill the tea.
Remember how much the prosecution relied on that blood spatter evidence? Well, it turned out that the blood spatter analyst, this guy named Dwayne Deaver, who worked for the State Bureau of Investigation, well, he was a bit of a fraud.
A fraud. You're kidding.
Not kidding. The state started investigating him, and they found all this evidence of misconduct. He was exaggerating his qualifications, misrepresenting evidence, maybe even making up results in a bunch of cases, including Peterson's.
Hold on. So the evidence that helped put Peterson away, the testimony from this so-called expert, might have been totally bogus.
That's exactly what the investigation found. Dever ended up getting fired, and his testimony in tons of cases was suddenly questionable. The whole Peterson case was completely shaken up.
That's huge. We're not talking about some small technicality here. This was a major part of the prosecution's case that just crumbled. So what happened to Peterson's sentence after that?
Well, the judge from the original trial, Judge Orlando Hudson, decided to give Peterson a new trial. It was a huge win for the defense. Peterson had already spent 8 years in prison, but he was finally released on bail and put under house arrest while they prepared for the retrial.
It's crazy how just when you think it's over, the story takes another turn. So Peterson's out of prison, everyone's gearing up for another trial. Did the prosecution just give up? Or were they going to try to build a new case without Dever?
Oh, they didn't give up at all. Both sides were ready for another fight, and the media, of course, went nuts. And remember that documentary, The Staircase, they were still filming this whole time, capturing all the drama, all the legal back and forth. It was like the documentary itself became part of the story.
It's so interesting how these documentaries can give you that inside look at a case, a different perspective, and maybe even influence how the public sees things. But anyway, so they were all set for this big retrial. What happened next? Did they actually go back to court and do it all over again?
Well, that's where things get even more complicated. Instead of going through another whole trial, Michael Peterson made a decision that surprised pretty much everyone. He chose this legal move that kind of brought the case to a sudden and confusing end.
All right, so we're back, and the Peterson saga continues. Last time we left off, it was 2011. Peterson's out on bail waiting for a retrial. It was a total cliffhanger.
And what a cliffhanger it was. So it's 2017, and instead of going through another whole trial, Michael Peterson decides to enter an Alford plea to voluntary manslaughter.
Yeah, I remember that. It was all over the news. But to be honest, Alford pleas, they always kind of confuse me. Can you break that down for us? Like, what does that even mean?
It's definitely a unique legal strategy. Basically, it lets a defendant say, hey, I'm innocent, but at the same time acknowledge that the prosecution probably has enough to convict them anyway. So you're basically pleading guilty to avoid getting hit with an even worse sentence, even if you truly believe you didn't do it.
So Peterson was basically saying, I didn't kill Kathleen, but I'm taking this plea deal because I don't think I can win if we go through another trial.
Exactly. It was a calculated risk for sure, especially since he could gotten another life sentence if the new trial didn't go his way.
Yeah, that's a tough call. After fighting for his innocence for so long, to basically admit guilt, what happened after he entered the Alford plea? What was the sentence?
Well, because of the Alford plea, the judge sentenced Peterson to time served. He'd already spent more time in prison than the sentence for voluntary manslaughter, so he was released right then and there.
So after more than 15 years of legal battles, imprisonment, and all that crazy media attention, Michael Peterson was finally free. But even though the case was officially closed, it still feels so unresolved, you know?
Absolutely. The debate about what really happened to Kathleen Peterson never really went away. I mean, there's still so many unanswered questions.
That's what makes this whole case so fascinating, right? There's no neat and tidy ending, no clear answer.
And that ambiguity is kind of built into the Alford plea itself, right? It's both a declaration of innocence and an acceptance of a plea that suggests guilt. It's a strange outcome for sure.
We've covered so much ground with this case, right? We started with the initial incident, talked about all the different evidence, the conflicting expert opinions. Then there were the bombshells about the blood spatter analyst and the owl theory, and of course that wild trial that had everyone talking. What stands out to you the most about this whole story?
I think what really gets me is that we still don't know for sure how Kathleen Peterson died. Was it just a horrible accident? Or was it a brutal murder? Or was there something else going on entirely? We might never really know the truth.
And for everyone listening, think about it. What evidence stuck with you? Do you think justice was served? Even though there was a legal resolution, this case still feels like an open book in a lot of ways. It makes you think about the limits of our justice system, how the media can shape public opinion, and the fact that sometimes, even with all the evidence in the world, the truth can remain a mystery.
And it's important to remember that behind all the headlines and legal drama, there are real people whose lives were forever changed by this tragedy. Families trying to cope with loss and searching for answers that may never come. The Michael Peterson case is a powerful reminder that sometimes the truth is just out of reach.
Well said. A huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the Michael Peterson case. It's definitely a story that stays with you long after the credits roll. It challenges us to think about truth, justice, and the complexities of the human experience. And who knows, maybe someday new evidence will emerge that finally sheds light on what really happened that night in Durham, North Carolina. But until then, the mystery continues.